Hi, this is Melissa Nilsson with the Santa Clarita Valley Quilt Guild, and I'm going to show you how to make 4 at a time flying geese, otherwise known as no-waste flying geese. We're using these geese both in our March block and our April block of the month for 2021. In our March block, we have them with the points going out, like that, to make a diamond. And our finished block looks like this. Here's the geese. In our April block, we have the points going towards the center, which make up star legs. And the block looks like that. More at the end of this video on making the March and April blocks, but for now we're going to learn how to make the 4 at a time flying geese. So here's a flying geese size chart for making the 4 at a time geese. You can find this on our website. For the blocks, for our March and April blocks, we need a 3x6 finished block. So we need one piece that's 7 3/4 and one piece that's 4 1/4. Now, in terms of what color to use for the March block, we want our whatever the center triangle is here, that's going to be your larger piece. Then the smaller corner triangles, that's going to be your smaller pieces. So the 4 1/4 become these smaller triangles, the 7 3/4 becomes this center triangle. For the March block, we had blue as that big piece. For the April block where we make the star, we want white as the big piece. So back to our size chart here. Once the block is sewn into your block, the geese will be 3x6. So you're going to create it and trim it to 3.5 by 6.5 to give you that 1/4 inch seam allowance on all 4 sides. So the first step is to draw a line diagonally on all 4 of your smaller 4 1/4 inch pieces. When you draw this line, you can use pen, pencil, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be one of those fancy iron away pens because you're going to cut right on that line that you draw. When you sew, you're going to sew 1/4 inch away from that line on both sides. So if you don't have a 1/4 inch foot for your sewing machine, draw another line. That's going to be your sewn line. And this one I did in pencil because that blue may show through with on my seam. Okay, so go ahead and draw that line on all 4 of your 4 1/4 inch pieces. Once you have your drawn lines on all 4 pieces, you're going to set 2 of the pieces aside. Bring in your large 7 3/4 inch piece. Make sure it's right side up. Now with batiks, it's hard to tell sometimes right side up, right side down. If you can't tell, it doesn't matter. But if there's one side that's slightly crisper than the other, then that's your right side up. You're going to take your small pieces and put them right in the corners of your large piece on opposing corners. And you want that drawn line that's down the center of your pieces to line up here in the middle. There will be an overlap of pieces here, about a 3/4 inch overlap. Next, we're going to take this to our sewing machine and we're going to sew 1/4 inch away from that center line all the way down on both pieces. You can stick a pin in there to help hold it. Just make sure your pin is well away from where you're sewing so that it doesn't get in the way of your sewing. So you bring your piece to the sewing machine, you line it up so that the right edge of your 1/4 inch foot here is right on that first drawn line that's down the center of the squares. If you had to draw the additional lines, then you're going to be sewing right on that additional line that you drew. And you just continue sewing now onto the second piece. When you get to the end, you're just going to rotate your piece around and then sew a 1/4 inch away from that drawn line on the other side. So I'll line up the edge of my 1/4 inch foot right on that drawn line. Then I'm going to bring it over to my iron. Just give it a quick press to get some of those bubbles out. And next we're going to cut right on that first drawn line, the one that goes down the center from corner to corner. The 1/4 inch mark of your ruler is going to go right on the sewn line on this side. The edge of your ruler will be right on that drawn line. You cut them apart. Flip your little ears back, and then you're going to sew those flaps open. Sorry, iron the flaps open. That looks like a little heart. Next, you'll take one of your other 4 1/4 inch pieces. You're going to line it up in the remaining corner of this larger piece. Your drawn line is going to go right up here in the center between these two ears. And again, you're going to sew a 1/4 inch down this side, come around and a 1/4 inch back up that side. And you're going to do it on both pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and prepare my second one, and then I will chain piece them. So again, just right here along the, bringing your presser foot, the edge of your 1/4 inch presser foot on that drawn line, or if you don't have a 1/4 inch presser foot, draw a 1/4 inch line here away from the drawn line, and then that's where you're going to sew. Then I'll bring my second one right up in here and keep on going. Okay, again I will just do a quick press to get the bubbles out. Oops, I forgot to go back on my other side, so let me go do that. There we go. So now I have seams on both sides of my drawn line. On both pieces. I ironed them to get the bubbles out, and now we're going to trim on that drawn line. So again, you're going to set your ruler so that the sewn line is right on the 1/4 inch mark on your ruler, and that diagonal drawn line is right at the edge of your ruler. And you'll cut them apart. And now you have 4 flying geese. So now we're going to press these open. So again, you just pull the ear back and you press it. Press all 4 of them. And the last step is to trim them. We want to trim these to 3.5 by 6.5 because once it's sewn into our block, it's going to become 3 by 6. I'm going to show you 2 ways of trimming. One is with a specialty Flying Geese ruler. The one I have is from Creative Grids, but there's lots of different makers of them. I've been told that there are ones that have grooves and then that line up right into the seams, so that might be a nice one to look for. Mine does not do that. So here's what my Creative Grids ruler looks like. There's a trim 1 on one side and a trim 2 on the other side. So you start with the trim 1 with your geese pointing up. You find the 3 by 6 line on the ruler. Mine is white, so it's going to be hard to see here on the camera. But you find that 3 by 6 line, and you move it so that that line is right on the seam on both sides of your geese. And then you're going to trim along the right side and the top side. Let me get my paper out of the way here. So you want that line, your 3 by 6 line, to be right on your seam lines. And then the point of that 3 by 6 line ought to be right in the point of your geese. And then you're going to trim on the right side and the top. And then you're going to flip it over so that the point is going to the bottom. You'll then also flip your ruler over. Again, you're going to find the 3 by 6 line here on your ruler. So you have a vertical line as well as a horizontal line. Those lines will get lined up with the edge of your fabric along the left and bottom edges. And again, you're going to trim along the right and the top. And you also want to make sure that these 45-degree lines are nestled nicely in your seams. If you don't have a Flying Geese ruler, you can use a regular ruler. It just needs to be one that has a 45-degree line on it. So here I have taped off at the 3.5-inch line and the 6.5-inch line to make it easier for you to see. And with this method, you're going to start with your geese pointing down. You're going to find the 45-degree line on your ruler, and you're going to line it up with the seam on the right side of your goose. Note that you have to have the 1 and the 1 at the top right corner of your ruler to make this work. You're going to move this ruler up and down that seam line until the 6.5-inch mark on your ruler. Move this over a little bit, make sure you can see. Until that 6.5-inch point on your ruler is lined up with the seam on your Flying Geese. Likewise, the top right part of your ruler, this top right edge, needs to be right on that seam line. So long as that's lined up, so if your 45-degree line is on your seam line, and that point is on that seam, and then on this side, the 6.5-inch mark on the ruler is right on that seam line, then you're going to trim the right side and the top side. Other things to note: the point of your Flying Geese, there needs to be at least 1/4 inch from that point down to the 3.5 inch line on your ruler, because that's going to be your seam allowance and will keep it from sewing over the point of that goose. If your ruler looks like this, where that point is now within that 1/4 inch from 3 1/4 to 3.5, you'll end up taking off the point. So you bring it down like that. That point ought to be sitting right at 3 1/4, both this way and this way on your ruler. Once that's all in place, you trim the right and you trim the top. Okay, now you're going to flip it over so the point is going up. And you're going to line up the 6.5 inch line here along the left edge of your fabric and the 3.5 inch line along the bottom edge of your fabric. So again, that's the 3.5 mark here on your ruler and the 6.5 mark on this side, lined up right there with the edge of your fabric. And again, you're going to trim the right side. And notice the right where those two fabrics come together, right at that seam line, is right at the edge of your ruler. So you trim the right, you trim the top. And now you have a flying geese that's 3.5 tall by 6.5 wide, and there's at least 1/4 inch from the point to the edge of the fabric that will get taken up in the seam allowance. So just repeat that with your remaining geese to trim them all to 3.5 by 6.5. I'll do another one here. So we start with our point down. We line up the 45-degree line on our ruler with the seam in our flying geese on the right side. We get the top right corner of our ruler right on that seam line. Over here on the left side, we get the 6.5 inch mark right on the seam of our flying geese right there. We check down here at the bottom. We see that we have at least 1/4 inch from the point of our goose down to the 3.5 inch line on our ruler. And then we trim the right side and the top side. Then we flip our goose over. We line up the left side of our fabric with the 6.5 inch line on our ruler, the bottom of our fabric with a 3.5 inch line on our ruler, the corner of our flying geese up here at the top ought to be at the 3 1/4 inch mark on our ruler. And then we trim the right and the top. So go ahead and do your last one, and then we'll show you how to put this all together. For our March block of the month, we're doing a diamond and a square. So you lay out your flying geese like that. You have a 6.5 inch piece that's going to go in the middle, and then 4 3.5 inch pieces that go in the corners. I always lay my blocks out first, make sure it looks right. I even then bring in my pattern and I check the pattern against the block to make sure that it looks correct. That helps you keep from having to rip out stitches. And then you're going to sew this together like a 9 patch. You're going to flip over your right pieces to the center. Take them over to your sewing machine and you'll just sew a 1/4 inch all the way down, and I'll chain piece my 3. pull in the next one, and I just keep right on going down. Make sure my edges are lined up nicely. And then my third one. Clip my threads. And then I take these back over and I lay them back out, and that way I make sure that I'm not flipping my pieces the way that they're not supposed to go. And then I will flip over my left pieces to the center, and I'll chain piece these three. Okay, so for these I iron the middle row towards the center. And the top and bottom rows out towards the outside edge. And then we're going to sew our 3 rows together, and this block will be done. So again, I lay it out so I can see it, make sure that I have everything going in the correct direction. You should see a blue diamond behind the center red square. I'm going to flip my bottom piece to my center, and then I check my seams. So I've got a bit of a gap here, and I've got a bit of a gap there. So as I sew, I'm going to tug that bottom piece a little bit to get it to mesh up those seams. I'm also going to look at my top 2 seams and make sure that they are lined up as good as they can be as well. So I've lined up my top 2 pieces. I'm going to take a few stitches, and then I'm going to stop and check and see how well these seams are lined up here. Let's see if I can get it to focus on that spot. There we go. So I have a little bit of a gap. My top piece needs to come down just a little bit. So I'm just going to give a gentle little tug until I have those seams lined up pretty well. Get my extra threads out of the way. And then I'm going to keep my finger on it. I can feel, if it feels like a bump there, then one is sitting too far over the other. So long as it feels pretty flat, then you know you have them lined up. Then I'm going to keep sewing until I get just past that seam. Then I'm going to come down here and look at where the next seam is. And I've got a bit of a gap where I need to pull the bottom down. So if I pull the bottom down now, instead of waiting till I'm closer to it, I have this entire line of fabric here to help ease in that Then as I get close, I'm going to stop and check it again and make sure it's still okay. I'm going to bring it back over. You can see we did a pretty decent job of getting those seams lined up. Once we iron it flat, it'll look a little bit better. And then we're going to take the top row and we'll flip it down to the middle. And again, we'll line up our seams as best we can. Looking at both the top and the bottom. So on the left side, I've got quite a bit of gap. So I'm going to bring it down so that this one lines up perfectly. And then down here, oh, that's not too bad actually. I'll have to yank down a little bit down here. So I'm going to start doing a few stitches here at the top, and then I'm going to pause and check that seam. So I took my first few stitches. Look at this seam real close here. And I just need to tug down just a little bit to get it to mesh up. And I'm going to stick my fingers there and press to hold that together as I sew. And I want to point out that as I press on that seam, I'm not pulling on the fabric. I'm letting the fabric gap up a little bit so that the sewing machine is not tugging the fabric. I'm just holding those seams together. So now I'm going to look down here at this bottom one. I've got quite a bit of a gap. So I'm going to gently tug here on my bottom fabric until those two seams line up. I'm going to pinch to hold those together as I start to sew. And again, I'm not pulling on the fabric here where it's going to the presser foot. I'm just pinching down here where the two seams are together. Alright, now we're going to press it open. So whether to press these seams out or in, with this particular block, you really need to do half one way and half the other. If you're only making one block, you just choose a direction and we'll deal with it later. And the reason I say that is when you go to put these guys together, we're not going to have any sashing on them. So you do want half of them with the seams pressed out and half with the seams pressed in, so that they'll nest nicely when you put them together. Once these guys are together, they form a four patch here, where the four blocks come together, and you'll get an alternating lighter colored diamond. So you'll have the diamond from your flying geese, but as they come together, it forms another diamond around the four patch. That's why I call it the four patch diamond. So that's our March block of the month. And our April block of the month, we actually have two blocks. We have the bordered monkey wrench, and there's a separate tutorial for that one. And then a second block is a star block using the exact same flying geese method, 4 at a time flying geese method. But with that one, you're going to have your flying geese pointing in towards the center, and it will make a star block. So the cutting directions for the April block star are at the very bottom of the bordered monkey wrench block instructions. So that's how it will look as a star block. Here's the April block of the month instructions. So the top part is your bordered monkey wrench, and the bottom shows you how to put the star together. But it's the exact same method of creating your flying geese to make the star block as what we just went through. So thanks much for making our block of the month. These blocks are going to be used to make bed and lap quilts for the Cal veterans, and we really appreciate your help. Till next time, bye-bye. Oops, I forgot to mention one last thing, and that is to measure your block when you're done. Whether you're making a block for a communal project like our Veterans Quilts, our block of the month, or you're making these blocks for your own quilt, you want to measure each one and make sure that it's the right size so that your quilt will fit together properly when you go to sew all the blocks together. So for our March and April block of the months, we want our blocks to be 12.5 inches by 12.5 inches. If it's not 12.5 by 12.5, then you need to correct it. So it can be within about a 1/8 of an inch or so too small, and we can still fit them together. Although if it's an 1/8 to a 1/4 inch too small, what you can do is you can spray it with heavy starch and then iron it. And as you iron, you gently stretch it and pull the fabric to get it to be the right size. And then as you iron, the heavy starch will dry and it will hold its shape. If it's too big, in this type of a block, you cannot trim because we need that 1/4 inch from that edge of the point to the edge of the fabric to go on the seam allowance. If you just come along and trim the edge to make it the right size, when we go to sew them together, we'll lose the tips of our points here. So for one that's too big, if it's within 1/8 of an inch too big, it's okay. We can work around it, but any more than that, and we'll need you to take the block apart and re-sew the seams. So figure out how much it is too big. Let's say it's 1/8 of an inch too big. Well, what you'll do is you're going to sew a 1/16 of an inch on this side of your sewn line. 1/16 of an inch on that side, 1/16 of an inch on the other side. If it's too big in the other direction, then you're going to have to take your block apart so that you can shrink up this seam by 1/16 of an inch and that seam by 1/16 of an inch. So again, you measure, you figure out how much it is too big, you cut that measurement in half, and then that's how much you're going to have to take up the seams on both sides. And then again on the other two sides, if that side is also the same measurement off. Hopefully that made sense, and good luck, and thanks again for helping us with our block of the months. Take care till next time.